A tired woman fell asleep on a cowboy's shoulder during a stagecoach ride, but what happened after the laughter started was something neither of them saw coming. The stagecoach jerked to a stop in the middle of Medicine Ridge. Someone laughed. Then another voice joined in. Josephine's eyes flew open, and her heart dropped. Her head was resting against a stranger's shoulder. Dust hung in the morning air. A coffee cup rattled against a window frame. The cowboy beside her didn't move, didn't complain, didn't even look surprised. Instead, he slowly tipped his hat and said something that made the entire coach go quiet. "Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what would have gone through your mind in that moment." The stagecoach rolled into Medicine Ridge beneath a sky the color of worn leather. Dust drifted across the main street and settled on wagon wheels, porch rails, and the hats of men waiting outside the general store. 3 days of hard wind had followed the coach down from the mountain pass. Inside, most of the passengers sat stiff and tired. Josephine Carter barely noticed the town. She had spent the last 2 weeks searching for work from one settlement to the next. Her small cloth bag rested in her lap. Everything she owned fit inside it. The coach lurched over a rut. She tried to keep her eyes open, failed. The steady rocking of the wagon pulled her under. A few minutes later, the stagecoach stopped in the center of Medicine Ridge. Laughter broke out immediately. Not cruel laughter, surprised laughter. Josephine woke with a start. For a second, she didn't understand why everyone was looking at her. Then she realized her head was resting against someone's shoulder. A man's shoulder. She jerked upright so quickly she nearly struck the window. "Oh, Lord, I'm sorry." Several passengers chuckled. The man beside her simply adjusted his hat. Colt Harrison. Everyone in town knew him. Owner of Harrison Ridge Ranch. Quiet. Reliable. The kind of man who could spend an entire day writing fence lines and say fewer than 20 words. Josephine gathered her bag. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," Colt said. His voice was calm. Nothing more. Nothing less. Outside the coach, a few men standing near the feed store exchanged amused looks. One woman whispered something to her husband. Josephine felt heat rise into her face. She stepped down from the coach before anyone could say another word. By the time she reached the boardwalk, Colt was already walking away. No smile, no farewell. Just the steady pace of a man heading back to work. The next morning, Josephine visited the sewing shop. The owner shook her head before she finished speaking. The day after that, she tried the bakery, then the boarding kitchen, then the mercantile. Each answer sounded different. Each answer meant the same thing. No vacancy, no need. Try somewhere else. The coins in her pocket grew fewer. The room she rented above Miller's boarding house grew harder to keep. On the 5th evening, Mrs. Miller folded her hands across her apron. "I'm sorry, Josephine. If rent isn't paid by Saturday, I'll need the room." Josephine nodded. There was no point arguing. That night, the temperature dropped. She sat alone on a bench outside the post office while lanterns flickered along Main Street. Her bag rested beside her. Her eyes closed for just a moment, then another. Across the street, a small girl carrying a sack of flour stopped walking. Daisy Miller watched the woman sleeping on the bench. She stood there for nearly a minute. Then she turned and ran. Past the blacksmith, past the church, past 2 wagons parked outside the saloon, toward Harrison Ridge Ranch. When she found Colt near the barn, she was breathing hard. "Mr. Harrison!" Colt looked up from the saddle he was repairing. Daisy pointed back toward town. "That lady from the stagecoach. What about her? She's asleep outside the post office." Colt waited. Daisy planted both hands on her hips. "You could at least let her sleep in a barn." For the first time all day, Colt stopped working. The hammer remained motionless in his hand. Outside, the autumn wind moved through the dry grass, and for several long seconds, he stared toward the distant lights of Medicine Ridge without saying a word. Something in his expression shifted, something Daisy couldn't quite name. Then Colt set the hammer down, slowly, deliberately, and headed for his horse. Colt found Josephine just where Daisy said she would be. The post office lamp had burned low. A cold line of moonlight lay across the boardwalk, and Josephine sat folded against the wall with her cloth bag tucked beneath one arm. She woke when his boots touched the step. For a moment she looked ready to run. Colt stopped several feet away. "Mrs. Carter?" She blinked, then sat straighter. "Mr. Harrison, you got a place tonight?" Her fingers tightened around the bag. "I'll manage." That wasn't the question. The wind moved dust along the street in little dry waves. Somewhere behind the saloon, a horse stamped once against its stall. Josephine looked down at her shoes. The right sole had started to pull loose at the toe. Colt saw it. He said nothing about it. "I've got work at my ranch," he said. "Cooking. Housekeeping some. Keeping simple books if you can." "I can keep books. I'll pay fair. You'll have your own room, door shuts, lock works. Nobody owes anybody anything." That made her look up. There was no softness in his face, no smile meant to persuade her. Just a man standing in the street, saying exactly what he meant. Josephine rose slowly. "All right," she said. The ride to Harrison Ridge took nearly an hour. The trail climbed north out of town, past dry creek beds and pale bunchgrass silvered by frost. Colt rode ahead at first, then slowed so her horse could come beside his. He did not ask where she had come from. She did not ask why his house needed help. By the time they reached the ranch gate, dawn had begun to gray the Bitter Hawk Mountains. The sign over the entrance hung crooked on iron brackets. Harrison Ridge. The house stood beyond a wide yard, solid and dark, with a stone chimney and a porch that had not known paint in years. Daisy came running out first. "You came." Josephine gave the girl a tired smile. "Seems I did." Inside, the house was clean, but cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather. The kitchen shelves were neat. Too neat. The stove held dead ash. A stack of unopened receipts sat under a coffee cup near the window. Colt pointed down the hall. "Room's there. Ruth Walker comes by twice a week. She'll show you where things are." Josephine stepped into the room. A narrow bed, a washstand, a quilt folded at the foot. On the door, just as he had said, was a working lock. She touched it once with her fingertips. By noon, she had swept the kitchen, found flour in the wrong tin, and written 3 missing supply amounts on a scrap of paper. By supper, stew simmered on the stove with onion, salt pork, and potatoes from the cellar. Colt came in from the barn and stopped at the door. The smell reached him first. Daisy sat at the table with a primer open, listening while Josephine sounded out a sentence. The lamp burned steady between them. Colt took off his hat. Nobody asked him why he stood there so long. Weeks passed in small changes. A curtain was mended. The receipts were sorted by month. The coffee tasted less like old iron. Daisy laughed once with her mouth full and covered it fast, then laughed again because Josephine did. Colt kept his distance. Josephine respected it. Then came the rain. It fell hard after midnight, washing the yard into black mud. Colt rode in near dawn, soaked through after pulling 3 head of cattle from a wash below the South Ridge. His hands were stiff. His coat dripped onto the floor. Josephine looked up from the hearth. "Coffee's warm." He nodded, took the cup, and sat in the chair near the fire. Daisy was asleep on the rug, wrapped in an old blanket. Josephine sat beside her with a book still open in her lap. Colt meant to drink the coffee. He meant to stand. Instead, his eyes closed. When morning came, sunlight lay across his boots. The cup sat untouched in his hand. Colt woke slowly, confused by the quiet, by the blanket Josephine had placed over his shoulders, by the fact that no dream had dragged him out of sleep before dawn. Across the room, Josephine was kneading biscuit dough. She did not mention it. Neither did he. But when Colt rode out later that morning, he looked back at the house once from the gate, and that frightened him more than the storm had. Autumn settled deeper over Medicine Ridge. The cottonwoods along the creek turned yellow. Frost lingered longer in the mornings. Ranchers spent their days preparing for winter drives and checking fences before the first hard snow. Life at Harrison Ridge found a rhythm. Josephine rose before sunrise. Coffee was already brewing by the time Colt came in from the barn. Daisy read aloud from her schoolbook after supper. And for reasons Colt could not quite explain, the house no longer felt like a place he passed through between jobs. It felt lived in. That should have been a good thing. Instead, it left him uneasy. People noticed. Medicine Ridge noticed everything. They noticed Josephine standing beside Daisy outside church on Sundays. They noticed her buying flour and lamp oil at the mercantile. They noticed Colt slowing his horse when she walked across town, carrying ledgers from the feed supplier. No one said much at first. Then they started whispering. By October, the whispers had become conversations. Conversations became opinions. Opinions became stories. One afternoon, Colt stepped into Miller's general store and found two ranch hands suddenly changing the subject when he approached the counter. Another morning, Josephine entered the post office and saw three women stop talking the moment she reached the mail table. Neither of them commented on it. Both of them understood. The Harvest Festival arrived during the last week of October. It was the largest gathering of the year. Families came from ranches 30 miles away. Wagons lined Main Street. Children chased each other between market stalls. A fiddler played beneath a canvas awning, while smoke from barbecue pits drifted through town. Daisy begged to go. Josephine finally agreed after Ruth Walker promised to meet them there. Colt said very little, but he hitched the wagon himself. The trouble started shortly after noon. Josephine was standing near a table covered with quilts and preserves when a voice carried across the crowd. Not loud, just loud enough. A person ought to remember where they belong. Conversation around them faded. Josephine turned slowly. The speaker was Clara Denton, wife of a neighboring ranch owner. Several people lowered their eyes. Others pretended not to hear. Clara smiled politely. The kind of smile that wasn't kindness at all. A town works best when folks know their place. Silence settled across the square. Josephine felt every eye turn toward her. For a moment she considered walking away. Then she remembered every road she had traveled, every door that had closed, every job she had lost. She stood where she was, straight-backed, quiet. Daisy moved closer to her side. The crowd waited. Then another sound broke the silence. Boots crossing wooden planks. Slow, steady. Colt Harrison. He stopped beside Josephine. His face gave nothing away. No anger, no embarrassment, no hesitation. From inside his coat he removed a small silver badge, the membership emblem of the Medicine Ridge Cattle Association. Every rancher in the valley recognized it. He placed it gently into Josephine's hand. People stared. No one spoke. Then Colt looked toward the crowd. "If she doesn't belong here," he said evenly, "then neither do I." The words landed harder than shouting ever could. A murmur spread through the square. Clara Denton's smile vanished. The fiddler stopped playing. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Then Colt turned to Daisy. "Want some pie?" The little girl nodded immediately. The tension broke. Conversations slowly resumed. But the story was already traveling. By sunset, it would reach every ranch in the valley. That night, after Daisy fell asleep, Josephine sat alone at the kitchen table. The lamp cast a pool of yellow light across a stack of old ranch ledgers. She had started organizing them weeks earlier. Feed purchases, water fees, equipment invoices. Most were ordinary. One was not. A column of figures caught her attention. She checked it twice. Then a third time. The numbers didn't match. According to the records, Harrison Ridge was paying for water rights that should already belong to the ranch. She pulled another document from the stack, then another. Outside, wind rattled the porch rail. Inside, Josephine's pulse began to quicken. Someone had altered the records. Carefully, quietly, over several years. At the bottom of one page was a signature, a name she recognized immediately. Silas Boone. Josephine stared at it for a long moment, then reached for another ledger. Because suddenly, this was no longer about gossip, and she had a feeling something much larger was hiding inside the numbers. The kitchen clock ticked softly while the rest of the house slept. Josephine turned another page, then another. The lamp beside her hissed quietly as oil burned low. Outside, wind brushed across the porch. Inside, rows of numbers began telling a story. Not a good one. Water fees appeared twice in some years, missing in others. Certain payments had been redirected through legal filings she had never seen before. By midnight, she had spread 6 ledgers across the table. A 7th sat open on her lap. The signature appeared again. Silas Boone. And beneath it, on several documents, another name. Vernon Pike. Josephine knew enough bookkeeping to understand what she was seeing. Someone had been moving ownership rights slowly, quietly, one document at a time, like stealing fence posts one board at a time until nobody noticed the fence was gone. The next morning she rode into town, not to confront anyone, not yet. She needed proof. The courthouse sat beside the sheriff's office, a plain wooden building with 2 front windows and a bell hanging above the door. Most people never looked twice at old records. Josephine did. For 3 afternoons, she copied dates onto scraps of paper. Water permits, boundary maps, grazing agreements. Every trail led back to Silas Boone, the largest ranch owner in the valley, a man rich enough that most people stopped asking questions before they reached his name. On the 4th day, Ruth Walker found Josephine sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by papers. Ruth adjusted her spectacles. "You look like someone trying to solve a murder." Josephine offered a tired smile. "I think somebody's stealing a ranch." Ruth's expression faded. She sat down immediately. "What kind of somebody?" Josephine slid a document across the table. Ruth read it, then read it again. Neither woman spoke for several seconds. Outside, Daisy's laughter drifted in from the yard. The sound felt strangely distant. That evening, Colt returned from checking fences near the North Ridge. Josephine almost told him. Almost. But she saw the exhaustion in his face, the dust on his coat, the way he rubbed his shoulder after dismounting. She decided to wait until she had everything. That decision would haunt her. 3 nights later, someone set fire to a hay shed near the east pasture. The blaze never reached the barn. Colt and 2 ranch hands caught it in time. But by sunrise, the shed was gone. The smell of wet ash lingered across the property. No one could prove who started it. A week later, the south fence line was found cut in 3 places. 40 cattle wandered nearly a mile before they were recovered. Again, no proof. Again, no answers. Then came the horse. One of the ranch mares became sick after eating grain left outside her stall. The veterinarian from town managed to save her, but standing in the stable that evening, watching the animal struggle to rise, Josephine finally understood. These incidents weren't random. Someone was sending a message, and that message was growing louder. The realization settled over her slowly. Silas Boone didn't need to threaten Colt directly. He only needed to make trouble expensive, unpredictable, constant. And if Josephine's investigation was discovered, the trouble would only grow. That night she sat alone on the porch. The moon hung low over Bitterhawk Mountains. A lantern glowed inside the house. Through the front window she could see Daisy reading beside the stove. Colt sat nearby repairing a bridle strap. Neither knew she was watching. For a long time she simply listened. The faint scrape of leather, the turning of pages, a home, a real one, something she had never expected to find, something she suddenly feared she might destroy. The decision came before dawn, quietly, without tears, without drama, just certainty. By sunrise her horse was saddled. Her small cloth bag rested beside the door. Inside were the same possessions she had carried into Medicine Ridge months ago. The kitchen was silent. The coffee pot sat cold. Josephine placed a folded piece of paper on the table. Then she looked around the room one last time. The repaired curtains, the shelves, Daisy's reading book, the chair where Colt often sat after supper. She touched the back of it briefly, then stepped outside. Mist rolled across the pasture. The ranch was still asleep. Josephine mounted her horse and disappeared into the gray morning. Less than an hour later, Colt entered the kitchen. He expected coffee, expected the sound of Daisy talking, expected another ordinary morning. Instead, he found the note, only one sentence, written in careful handwriting. "Thank you for giving me a home. Don't let me become the reason you lose it." The room suddenly felt too quiet. Colt stared at the paper, then at the empty hook where her coat usually hung, then at the window overlooking the road. For the first time in many years, fear hit him before thought. Not fear of losing land, not fear of winter, not fear of failure. Fear of losing her. And before the coffee on the stove had time to cool, Colt Harrison was already saddling his horse. The morning fog still clung to the low ground when Colt rode out of Harrison Ridge. Hoofbeats echoed across the empty trail. The note remained folded inside his coat pocket. He had read it 6 times already. Every word felt wrong. Not because Josephine had written it, because she believed it. The road south split near an old cottonwood tree. One branch led toward town. The other followed the freight route through Eagle Pass. Colt never hesitated. Josephine always chose practical roads, roads that led somewhere, roads where a woman traveling alone could find water and shelter before dark. He pushed his horse harder. By noon, the mountains rose around him in layers of gray stone and yellow pine. The wind carried the smell of approaching snow. Near a wagon stop at Eagle Pass, he finally saw her. A single horse tied beside a trough, a familiar cloth bag resting on a bench. Josephine stood near the edge of the overlook where travelers often stopped to eat and rest before crossing the ridge. She heard hoofbeats, turned, and froze. For a long moment, neither moved. The wind shifted between them. Colt dismounted slowly. His horse lowered its head toward the water trough. Everything else seemed to disappear. "You left." Josephine looked down. "I had to." "No." His voice was calm, steady. "You decided you had to." She folded her arms tightly. "The attacks started after I found those records. The attacks started because Silas Boone wants my land. He's using me to get it. Then he's a fool. Josephine shook her head. A loose strand of hair blew across her cheek. You don't understand. I understand more than you think. For a moment she looked exhausted. Not physically. The kind of tired that comes from carrying responsibility too long. If I stay, she said quietly, they keep coming after the ranch. Colt stared at the mountains beyond her shoulder, then back at her. When my fiancé died, everybody expected me to move on. Josephine blinked. He had never spoken about her before. After a while, they stopped asking. His eyes drifted toward the valley. I stopped coming home. The words hung in the air. Simple. Heavy. True. The ranch became a place to sleep. His hands rested loosely at his sides. Nothing more. Josephine didn't interrupt. The wind rattled a nearby sign. Somewhere below, a hawk cried over the canyon. Colt looked directly at her. I didn't bring you there because I felt sorry for you. She swallowed. I know, no. He took one step closer. I don't think you do. Silence stretched between them. Then he said the one thing he had carried all morning. The day you arrived. His voice roughened. The day you started making coffee before sunrise and leaving lamps burning in the kitchen. He paused. The day Daisy started laughing again. Josephine's eyes lowered. And the day I fell asleep beside that fireplace. He let out a quiet breath. I started wanting to come home. The words landed softly, not dramatic, not polished. Real. Like something pulled straight from the center of a man who rarely spoke at all. Josephine stared at him. The wind moved through the grass around their boots. For a second, she looked exactly as she had on that stagecoach, caught off guard, not by circumstance, by kindness. Colt reached into his coat, pulled out the folded note, and handed it back. You said you didn't want to be the reason I lost my home. She nodded. He looked around Eagle Pass, at the travelers, at the wagons, at the road stretching away toward nowhere. Then back at her. You are my home. Josephine closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, they glistened in the autumn light. Neither reached for the other. Neither needed to. The distance between them was already gone. 3 weeks later, the meeting hall of the Medicine Ridge Cattle Association was packed. Ranch owners filled every seat. Sheriff Dawson Reed stood near the front wall. Silas Boone occupied the center row, confident as ever, until Josephine placed the ledgers on the table, one after another. Receipts, permits, water filings, transfer records, every number connected, every signature matched, every missing acre traced back to the same scheme. The room grew quieter with each page. By the end, even Silas Boone had stopped smiling. Sheriff Reed collected the documents himself. No shouting followed. No grand confrontation. Just truth. And truth proved enough. By winter's end, the fraudulent filings were revoked. The water rights returned to Harrison Ridge. Vernon Pike lost his standing as a legal representative. Silas Boone lost far more than reputation. He lost the confidence of the valley. A year passed. Then another autumn arrived. Golden grass rolled across the hills surrounding Medicine Ridge. The ranch looked different now. Not larger. Warmer. Daisy raced across the yard, chasing a dog nearly twice her size. Laughter carried from the porch. The kitchen windows glowed at dusk. And every evening, someone waited when Colt returned home. One afternoon, a stagecoach rolled into town. A young woman inside had fallen asleep against the shoulder of a nervous young man. Passengers chuckled. The young man turned red. The young woman woke in embarrassment. Across the street, Josephine watched from the porch of the mercantile. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Colt stepped beside her. "Seen something funny?" She nodded toward the coach. Colt followed her gaze, then laughed softly. The sound still surprised her sometimes. He had done so little of it when they first met. Josephine leaned gently against his shoulder, the same way she had all those months ago without meaning to. Colt looked down at her. "Planning on staying there long?" The church bell rang somewhere across town, a familiar sound drifting through cool autumn air. Josephine smiled. "As long as you're here." The wind rolled through the golden fields beyond Medicine Ridge. The mountains stood quiet beneath the fading sun. And for the first time in many years, Colt Harrison had exactly what he once believed was gone forever. Someone waiting for him to come home. As the sun slipped behind the Bitterhawk Mountains and the last light settled across the fields, it's easy to imagine that this story was never really about a ranch, a land dispute, or even a lonely cowboy. It was about finding your way back to something you thought you had lost for good. If you place yourself in Colt's boots for a moment, maybe you know what that feels like. Maybe there was a season in your life when you stopped expecting joy to knock on your door. Maybe, like Josephine, you carried your whole world in a small bag and kept moving because standing still hurt too much. What makes this story stay with us is not the grand moments. It's the small ones. A cup of coffee waiting on the stove, a lamp left burning in the window, a chair pulled close to the fire. The quiet comfort of knowing someone is glad you came back. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it comes slowly, through ordinary days and steady people who remind us that home is not a place. It's a person. It's trust. It's being seen. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear where you're watching from and what part touched your heart the most. And if you enjoy stories about second chances, enduring love, and people finding light after difficult seasons, I hope you'll stay a little longer. There are many more journeys waiting just down the trail, and I'd be honored to share them with you. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep a light burning for the people you love.